welcome to today's show. I'm Jacqueline Stockwell, CEO and founder at Leadership Through Data. I inspire and motivate information leaders across the world.
Hello, I am excited to be here today with
Rowenna Fielding.
she brings a wealth of real-world experience to the table. She doesn't just focus on the law. Her mission is to help organizations connect technology, legal compliance, and human ethics, the one thing that we should never forget. She is here to help us figure out how we can use the power of the Data Use Act without sacrificing our humanity. So welcome today. So you've worked in data for over 10 years. What made you realise that just following the law isn't enough and that we also need ethics when using people's data?
Well, it's a funny thing. You say following the law isn't enough. If you actually go and have a look at data protection law, it's got the ethics right there in it. So the very first article of the GDPR says, that the processing of personal data should serve humankind and needs to protect human rights and freedoms. And so, that is the ethics of data protection law. So I think there's a real tendency to treat it as a compliance exercise where you just look like you're following the law, but without that underlying consideration of what it even exists for. So following the law is something that you can't do without ethics, because the law says things like appropriate, use appropriate measures, and reasonable, decide what's reasonable and assess the risk. Well, if you don't have sense of what your ethics are, then how will you know what appropriate and reasonable and acceptable risk are? So, I think there needs to be more. It struck me early on in my career, there needs to be much more paying attention to outcomes and possibly a bit less of paperwork. I mean, paperwork's great, but only if it reflects the desired outcomes.
Yeah, agreed. So you try and help companies connect technology, law, and people. If a company ignores the people part, as you just said, paperwork, people, what is the biggest danger for them?
Well, it depends who you ask.
Depends.
On what the biggest danger. It depends. Yeah, standard data protections person's answer. It depends. It depends who you ask. So there are individual harms. People being mistreated, fairness, being put at unfair disadvantage. The individuals who suffer those harms would probably argue that that's the biggest danger. You've got the business harms, potential for enforcement or litigation, which are very disruptive, mistrust among the customers, suppliers, peers, and also the competition might get ahead from just being better. And then looking wider, there's the societal harms, things like discrimination, with this obsession with, putting labels on people according to their data, leading to a lot of, categorization, discriminatory effects. You've got polarization. Social media algorithms are intended to drive anger and hate because that's what gets clicks. Abusive practices, power dynamics where individuals don't have the agency that they need to manage their lives properly. And then you can get even bigger and look at existential harms like the ecocide effect of surveillance advertising and AI, and massive data centers, just using up all the water and producing a load of emissions and wrecking the land. So there's, but the biggest danger kind of, it depends on where you sit looking at all this massive array of dangers of ignoring the human effects.
Yeah, so it's case by case. So it depends and case by case.
Yeah, it depends on what you value.
So and I love talking to you because you just take me from this sort of very structured kind of law approach to talking about water, and you just sort of snowball everything out and you make it such a bigger picture, and it's just this is kind of wow, I just love to be inside your brain when you describe things.
It's a very chaotic place.
It never sounds like it. What's the one thing most people get wrong when they talk about data in a good ethical way?
I think what most people get wrong about data ethics is assuming that because they're nice people with good intentions, therefore they're harmless. There's no need to look any harder. Nobody's intending to do anything wrong, therefore nothing wrong will happen. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Data is the most powerful technology humanity has invented, it's enormously dangerous because it's now easier to use and to do stuff with than it is to use sensibly, cautiously, responsibly, fairly, ethically. So it's not enough to refrain from doing bad things intentionally. To work with data safely and humanely and lawfully, it takes work. I think the mistake a lot of people make is assuming that they don't have to do that work because they're nice people with benign intent. As we know, with great power comes great responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And if that work isn't done, so it takes time, it takes effort, it takes attention, it takes action, and most of all, it takes away the assumption that, just because you're nice doesn't mean you're doing right.
Yeah.
The potential for unintended consequences is huge. And I think failing to recognise that or not being aware of that in the first place is probably, the biggest barrier to ethical data use.
And it's that review, isn't it? It's not just implementing it straight away and saying, yep, we're there, we're good. It's that review process and it's that constant monitoring of them as well.
It's what I call black mirroring. So, you've got in InfoSec, you've got red teaming where you simulate an attack. And black mirroring is where you look at, a technology or a use of data and you go what would a Black Mirror episode around this look like? What's the dystopian potential outcome of not thinking really hard about unintended consequences at the start?
I love that. Black mirroring. Love that. Love that. Right. So I'm going to take you on to something else that's a hot topic in our industry, the Data Use Act. So good versus right. So when you look at the goals of the new Data Use Act, where does the law itself create a moral problem or make things tricky for companies? It's a good question.
I think the potential, the Data Use and Access Act opens up a lot of potential for bad faith. And that's, not necessarily like Bond villain, wahaha, I'm going to, create Spectre and run the world kind of thing. It's just allowing corners to be cut when the process of assessment exists for a reason. So, for example, you've got this thing, recognise legitimate interests. So certain purposes for processing are recognise legitimate interests. Now, the caveat to that is as long as the processing is carried out according to the principles, rights and obligations of data protection law. But by saying, these things may be legitimate, recognise legitimate interests, it kind of has the effect of cutting off people's thinking at that point. It's like, it's recognise legitimate interests. So no matter what we're doing or how we're doing it, as long as we can say it's for this purpose, then, we don't have to think about anything else. But actually, the legitimate interest assessment, which no longer has to be documented for recognised legitimate interests, serves a purpose. The purpose is making sure that, you're not inadvertently or intentionally screwing people over in the ways that using the data, making sure that the processing activities are lawful, fair, transparent, proportionate, relevant, yada yada, secure, all that jazz. So I think the risk of harms is increased because it looks like it offers a corner cutting approach, and because of that, it'll make it harder for data subjects to challenge what's happened with their data and seek effective judicial redress, because it's kind of encouraging and normalizing corner cutting if that's the way people are reading it. And because business wants to do stuff that's fast, cheap and convenient, that is how it will be read. And it's just kind of not what it says, but it's an interpretation which is already becoming popular.
Okay. So how do you tell the difference between a data use that is legal, so following the Act, and one that is truly right, so it's ethical? Can't wait for your answer on this one.
Why is there a difference? I mean, if you're applying the law in the way that it is intended and written to be applied, there shouldn't be any difference between those two. I mean, you could do something with data which on the surface looks okay, but you might have cut corners or not considered harms, and harms may occur. That might be defensible in court, as in you might be able to argue, naivety rather than negligence, but that still doesn't make it lawful. It just means there wasn't enough evidence to prove that you failed. So you don't need law to tell business to prioritise what's fast, cheap, efficient, revenue generating, advantageous, because that's the default. That's what business exists to do. That was what it'll do. You do need law to tell businesses, companies, organisations, whatever, to refrain from harming people as they're pursuing their goals. So if an approach to data protection is already performative and insincere, then there's no to the way anyone's going to act, and the decision will always fall on the side of what's business advantageous when there is a conflict with what's safe for humans. Whereas if the organisation's approach is pro-human and anti-harm from the outset, maybe that's a core principle of the organisation. Like, I work with a lot of third sector organisations, and they don't just want to look like they're the good guys, they want to be the good guys. And so that kind of leads to more careful decision making. And in that case, there won't be a difference between what's lawful and what's right, because they'll be the same thing.
So let's just unpick that a little bit more. So the Act wants to make data valuable for businesses. So what are the ethical risks when we treat data mainly as money instead of treating it as information about like real people?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we really needed law that says, make data valuable for business. It already is. That's why we've got law to protect people from.
Yeah, and it's gold. Information is gold.
Absolutely. So I think that the main problem of treating data as a monetizable asset is that it leads to treating people like things. And as the late great Sir Terry Pratchett said in one of his books, the sin or evil starts when people treat people like things, not like people. So if it's to get all psychological about it, the data creates a layer of abstraction. So rather than feeling like you're dealing with people, it's just lines in a spreadsheet or tables in a database or, pixels on a screen. It's really, really easy to forget that the data represents real human beings with real feelings, real experiences. And while that forgetfulness, again, it may be, really commercially advantageous, socially not so much.
And I think you make such a good point there, isn't it? That when you're looking at, data, that's a person that you're looking at, and really have that sort of, powerful mindset going forward that actually think about things differently. And I think that's a great takeaway from that. So thank you so much. So a couple more questions as we go on.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start helping companies use data ethically, what is the first practical thing they need to change in how they work?
I mean, that's going to be an it depends, because it depends how they're working already.
No, don't give me it depends. Give me an answer.
Everything is it depends.
I know.
You said you wanted to look inside my brain. It depends.
I do.
Okay, so assuming the organisation is already got a handle on data management and data governance as part of its, good practices in data protection already, making that somewhat dangerous assumption, I would say that the first practical step they can take is education of the workforce, like not just training. So you're not teaching chickens to peck certain colour buttons in response to a cue, but education, like teaching people how to think or how to use their thinking equipment. And that's education about data harms and data hazards. So you can't make informed decisions without knowledge. It's up to the organisation to decide how much they care about this and what they want to do about it. But educating people about the bad things that happen when the anti-harm work isn't done. And that's not like bad as in, bad people may attack. It's the unintended consequences of, say, like the racially discriminated effect of using historical data for profiling. That reflects past social injustices, which are then applied and become present and future social injustices. So bad things that happen when the ethics work isn't done, spotting the danger zones and tackling them meaningfully. So I don't like to talk about risk. especially in the area of like data harms and data ethics, because risk is seen as something that you can put numbers on, that you can quantify. And you can't do that with data harms. Like, certain people, certain groups of people will be affected in certain ways, but you don't know exactly who or when or where. It's impossible to put numbers on that. And so in the absence of numbers, there's a tendency to assume that it, just doesn't exist then. Instead, treating it as a hazard, as in this is something that will be dangerous unless you put safeguards around it, that, I think, that mindset is the most fundamental part of the start of tackling data ethics. Like, there's no point going into frameworks and audits and checklists and yada yada, anything else, until you understand how and where data can be harmful.
Such a good point. So I was just in your brain there. That's such a good point. So companies always want to make decisions based on data driven. How do you help them start making decisions based on ethics and people instead, while still being successful? Because there's that balance, isn't there?
Again, not necessarily mutually exclusive. I do find the fashionable kind of drive to be data driven is not always on a foundation of statistical literacy. I mean, I am massively dyscalculic. I have to take my shoes off to count past 10. But I do understand the ways that numbers can be used to make things look like what somebody wants to make them look like. It's all in the questions you ask. So starting with the question, what is it you're trying to achieve? What is it you want to know? Why are you asking? And what makes you think this data is going to be of any use to you? See a lot of data that was, say, put together for one particular purpose. Now that it exists, that there's this drive to make maximum use of it, but it isn't necessarily the right data for another use. So part of, before even thinking about being pro-human and anti-harm, is the very fundamental, are we working with the right equipment here? Like, is this the right material to use? Are we asking the right questions? What do we want to know? Humans have this, the way human brains work is that, we're wired to look for patterns in things. We perceive patterns where patterns don't even exist. Like, we see faces in clouds and on pieces of toast and stuff, because our brains are optimized for seeing patterns in things that we can recognize. That's why we're at the top of the food chain. And it's really easy to see patterns in data that aren't necessarily there or don't mean anything. So a lot of what's called data science nowadays, it's not science, it's engineering. Science is about starting with a hypothesis, testing that hypothesis, paying as much attention to the negative outcomes as the positive, and going through a process, a repeatable, verifiable process of coming to conclusions. Whereas what's going on now is engineering. It's how can we get the data to give us this thing we've already decided we want. It's not the same thing at all. So being data-driven is only as worthwhile as the quality of the data, the understanding of the data, the understanding of what the data's for and why it's being used, and the understanding of, like, what is even the point of doing anything with this data in the first place? Like, what is it you're trying to achieve?
So that's such a good answer, because that leads me really nicely into my next question around AI. So AI is massive right now, and it's what anybody wants to talk about. But obviously, as you said, that data quality. So let's look at sort of new technologies. Is it going to cause the biggest ethical headache that the current Data Use Act doesn't deal with yet?
Compared to what? I mean, if we're going to talk ethical headaches, the very first use case in data profiling, industrialized data profiling, was created for the purposes of genocide. I'm serious. Yeah,
yeah, I know you are.
Yeah. The very first use of, assigning labels to people with a computerized system and using it to keep track of people and make judgments about them was for the Holocaust. So as far as ethical headaches go, it's kind of only developed from there. So I think in terms of future ethical headaches, it'll be more of the same, only bigger, faster and worse.
Yeah.
I know you're mentioning AI there. There's no such thing as AI. Like, AI is a marketing term. It's not a thing. Whether you're talking about algorithmic extrapolation or inference based on a set of training data, or even a simple procedural rules. Those are completely separate things. And the way that consumer AI is being marketed is as an alternative to thinking. And that's always going to be bad, because thinking is important.
Thinking is important. Creativity is important. Innovation is important. And, you know, people get worried about their jobs because of AI. But I love the way that you have just dismissed AI and then brought 3 concepts, because I was there with you with those concepts. Actually, AI is the terminology of it. So back into your brain then, Rowenna. I thought that was sensational. So just
I'm not anti-AI though. I want to be point the house, because people think that I'm anti-AI. I'm not. Algorithmic extrapolation technology, when it is built by subject matter experts looking to address a very specific and narrow use case with the right and diverse amount of training data and rigorous testing and tuning, is brilliant. Things like computer vision for spotting tumours in scans. That is a brilliant application because it was created and driven and built and tested by medics who understand the area. Whereas this thing we've got, where you've got, you know, every other tech bro and his sidekick, you know, going, I'm going to build a thing that creates a problem, that creates a solution to a problem people didn't even know they had, that's not good use of technology. It's just selling junk. So I'm not anti-AI. I am anti-stupid AI.
I didn't actually think you were anti-AI, but, you know, I use AI, you know, because my dyslexia really helps me formulate things, but also it helps me pull down my ideas some more. So I have an idea, it's really big picture, and then it kind of helps me formulate that into kind of processing. So I certainly use it from, you know, a accessibility
an LLM
standpoint.
is a tool, and for very specific use cases, it's a useful tool, but it should never be used as a substitute for thinking, or for knowledge. Like, don't ever ask an LLM a question you don't already know the answer to, because you won't have any way to check whether or not what it gives you back is rubbish.
Agreed. So we've just absolutely talked our way through this session today. So one final thing for listeners, Rowenna, what's the one thing that you want them to take away from this session, this podcast today?
Don't be a git.
I knew you were going to say that. Do you want to explain why that's your strapline?
So, don't be a git is more than don't go out of your way to be actively malicious and harmful. It also includes don't accidentally or negligently or recklessly cause harm to people through what you do with their data because you weren't paying attention. So not being a git is asking the questions like, what is it we're trying to do here? Testing the question of, is it fair? Like, if you ask somebody, is this idea that you've come up with fair? They're going to be like, yeah, of course it's fair. I'm not an evil person. Actually, the best way to interrogate that is to look for all the ways that it would be unfair and then tackle those. So critical thinking, don't be a git, is about not being complacent, not being kind of blinded by your own virtue that you don't notice where perhaps corners have been cut or things have been overlooked. And it means being pro-human and anti-harm with data. Amazing. Thank you so much. So you can reach out to Rowenna Fielding on LinkedIn. I would highly recommend you follow her. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely sensational.
Thank you for listening to the Journals of the Information Entrepreneur with me, Jacqueline Stockwell. I hope you found this episode inspiring and helpful and have some takeaway tips that can be useful to you. If you liked this episode, please like, review and share it with your friends. Your support helps us reach more information leaders to stay inspired and listen to great content. Want to test out your strengths and weaknesses and measure it against our Empower framework? Please complete the scorecard. It's a great way to improve and evaluate your skills. You can find the scorecard at the end of the description of this podcast. Stay tuned for a new podcast every Thursday, and remember to be bold, be brave and be beautiful.